Ladies and gentlemen, let's cut through the fluff and face the truth. What happens when someone who claims to defend free speech is exposed speaking without it, judged not by what they believe, but by what they contradict? Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on a spectacle, a fiery confrontation where words were not just exchanged. They were weapons. A moment where accountability, context, and integrity were put on trial. Because when someone is publicly called out for being a complete DK, it's not just an insult, it's a spotlight on every claim, every excuse, every argument they've made about being misunderstood, about being silenced. And we have witnesses, the clip, the interview, the reactions, everything laid out. We'll dissect, was this about cancel culture or about owning up to your words? Was it about being provoked or about provoking for headlines? Was it about principle or about performance? And yes, we'll also hear what others had to say, voices like Crowder and Joe Walsh stepping in with their own clap backs, their own shots fired, their own versions of truth. Accountability in journalism is not a slogan, it is the very foundation of trust between the press and the public. When a journalist sits in front of a camera or writes for millions to read, they carry the weight of responsibility. Words are not simply spoken into the void, they shape perceptions, fuel debates, and sometimes alter the course of history. That is why accountability is non-negotiable. When mistakes are made, when opinions masquerade as facts, or when bias clouds objectivity, the credibility of the journalist suffers, and with it, the credibility of the media as a whole. The modern media environment is more intense than ever. News is consumed not just from traditional broadcasts but from Twitter, TikTok, podcasts, and YouTube clips. In this fragmented landscape, accountability often becomes blurred. A soundbite can be taken out of context, a clip can go viral for the wrong reasons, and a headline can mislead more than it informs. Yet the burden remains on the journalist to ensure clarity, accuracy, and integrity. To shrug off responsibility and blame context or cancel culture is to weaken the very standards the profession is supposed to uphold. Take, for example, when a journalist makes an inflammatory comment and later claims they were misunderstood. If accountability means anything, it requires standing behind one's words, clarifying them honestly, and accepting the consequences that follow. It is not enough to insist that critics are unfair or that enemies are weaponizing a statement. Accountability means saying, yes, I said it, and here is why, or admitting, yes, I was wrong, and here is my correction. Without that humility, journalism becomes performance rather than service. Critics of accountability often claim that it stifles free speech, that journalists should be able to push boundaries without fear of backlash. But this argument misunderstands the point. Accountability is not censorship, it is the recognition that free speech carries weight. A journalist can say what they believe, but they cannot expect immunity from challenge or critique. To conflate the two is disingenuous. Accountability is the mechanism by which credibility is preserved. It ensures that when journalists speak, the audience can trust their intent and their rigor. In recent years, debates about accountability have collided with the rise of partisan media. Anchors and commentators have become celebrities in their own right, cultivating fan bases that cheer them on regardless of their accuracy. This complicates accountability, because applause often drowns out correction. When journalists are rewarded more for generating outrage than for uncovering truth, their incentive shifts from responsibility to spectacle. The result is a dangerous erosion of trust. The audience may still be entertained, but they are no longer informed. The real victims of this erosion are ordinary people. Viewers and readers depend on the press to cut through propaganda, to challenge lies, and to hold the powerful accountable. If journalists fail to hold themselves to the same standard, how can they credibly hold others to account? This hypocrisy is why accountability in journalism is not just professional housekeeping. It is an ethical obligation. It is the difference between being a watchdog for democracy and being another loud voice in the marketplace of noise. Free speech has always been celebrated as one of the most fundamental rights in any democracy. It allows individuals to challenge authority, question norms, and express dissent without fear of punishment by the state. At its best, free speech creates a marketplace of ideas where truth can be tested and lies can be exposed. But in today's cultural and political climate, the debate around free speech has become increasingly entangled with what people call cancel culture. This conflict is no longer just about whether someone can speak, but about what happens after they speak and whether social consequences amount to censorship. Cancel culture is often described as a form of public shaming, where individuals or organizations are boycotted, deplatformed, or ostracized for things they have said or done. Supporters of this practice argue that it is not censorship, but accountability. If a public figure makes a statement that is racist, sexist, or deeply offensive, people have every right to withdraw support, criticize them, and demand consequences. In this view, cancel culture is simply society exercising its own form of free speech, using collective voice to hold others responsible. After all, freedom of expression does not mean freedom from reaction. Opponents, however, see cancel culture as something much more insidious. They argue that it creates an environment of fear, where people are too intimidated to voice controversial or unpopular opinions. Instead of encouraging open debate, it punishes deviation from the accepted narrative. The result is a chilling effect where creativity, curiosity, and even humor are stifled because the risk of backlash is too high. People may not go to prison for their words, but their careers can be destroyed, their reputations ruined, and their livelihoods taken away. From this perspective, cancel culture is not accountability, it is mob justice. The tension between free speech and cancel culture becomes more complex when we consider the power dynamics involved. Some argue that cancel culture primarily targets the already powerful celebrities, politicians, wealthy commentators who have platforms far larger than their critics. In such cases, it can seem like a leveling of the playing field, where ordinary people finally have a voice against those who once operated without consequence. Others point out that the same mechanisms can, and often do, silence people without power. Young professionals, academics, or comedians whose lives can be derailed by a single viral moment. When outrage culture does not distinguish between malicious intent and clumsy mistakes, the line between justice and persecution blurs. Technology and social media have amplified this conflict. A single clip, tweet, or offhand comment can be shared millions of times, stripped of context and judged in the harshest possible light. What may once have been a minor controversy now becomes a global scandal. Free speech was designed for a world where ideas could be debated in public squares or newspapers. Cancel culture thrives in an environment where reaction is instant, emotional, and unforgiving. The speed of online outrage leaves little room for reflection or nuance. At its core, the struggle between free speech and cancel culture forces society to ask difficult questions. Should people be punished indefinitely for past mistakes, or do we allow room for growth and redemption? Do we want a society where everyone feels empowered to speak their mind, or one where people carefully censor themselves to avoid controversy? Is public backlash a healthy form of accountability, or is it silencing voices before they can even explain themselves? These are not questions with easy answers, but they define the cultural battle of our time. A public persona is more than just an image, it is the carefully crafted identity that individuals in the spotlight present to the world. For politicians, journalists, entertainers, or commentators, credibility is the invisible currency that sustains that persona. Without it, every word, every action, and every claim is met with skepticism, if not outright dismissal. The public may forgive flaws, but they rarely forgive hypocrisy. When there is a gap between how someone presents themselves and how they actually behave, credibility erodes, and with it the trust that gives their platform meaning. Building a credible public persona requires consistency. If someone champions integrity, they must be seen living by it. If they speak passionately about truth, they must be careful not to bend facts for convenience. Audiences are far more perceptive than many public figures realize. Inconsistencies are spotted quickly, amplified on social media, and debated endlessly. In today's media climate, Credibility is not only about what you say, but also how your words match your actions and past behavior. A single contradiction can undo years of careful branding, leaving the public questioning whether the persona was ever real to begin with. At the same time, credibility does not mean perfection. Audiences understand that mistakes happen, that people change, and that opinions evolve. What matters is how those moments are handled. When a public figure admits a mistake honestly, addresses it with humility, and shows a willingness to learn, their credibility can actually grow stronger. Transparency demonstrates authenticity, and authenticity builds trust. By contrast, denial, deflection, or blaming others only deepens suspicion. When people feel they are being manipulated or deceived, they turn away, sometimes permanently. For journalists and commentators in particular, credibility is the foundation of their influence. Their role is not merely to entertain, but to inform, challenge, and question. If viewers or readers believe that a journalist is biased, dishonest, or more interested in personal fame than public truth, the credibility of their reporting collapses. The danger here is not just personal, it ripples out to the entire profession. One compromised voice can become ammunition for those who want to discredit the media altogether. Credibility, therefore, is not a personal asset alone. It is a collective responsibility. The rise of digital platforms has made maintaining a credible persona even more complex. Every tweet, every video clip, every interview is stored, shared, and dissected. A comment made years ago can resurface instantly and be judged by today's standards. This creates an environment where credibility is constantly tested. Public figures must navigate the fine line between evolving with the times and appearing inconsistent. They must balance the need to remain authentic with the need to adapt to changing cultural and political landscapes. Ultimately, credibility is about alignment between words and actions, between values and behavior, between promises and delivery. A public persona without credibility is nothing more than a mask, attractive at first glance but fragile under scrutiny. Once it cracks, rebuilding trust is one of the hardest tasks any public figure will ever face. In a world oversaturated with voices competing for attention, credibility is what makes the difference between noise and authority. Provocation and shock have long been tools in the arsenal of media, but in the modern landscape they have become almost indispensable. With the relentless flood of information competing for public attention, standing out requires more than facts and reasoned arguments. It requires impact, and impact often comes through statements or moments that jolt the audience out of complacency. A sharp phrase, a heated exchange, or a shocking revelation can cut through the noise in a way that polite discourse rarely does. The psychology is simple. People remember what disturbs them, surprises them, or challenges their assumptions. Provocation in media can take many forms. It might be the journalist who asks an uncomfortable question that others avoid. It might be the commentator who uses blunt, even abrasive language to highlight hypocrisy or inconsistency. It might be the host who stages confrontations between guests with opposing views, knowing the sparks will generate attention. This deliberate strategy is not just about drama, it is about forcing issues into the spotlight. Without provocation, many topics would remain unchallenged, hidden behind the veil of politeness or political correctness. By pushing boundaries, media can expose contradictions and reveal truths that comfort would otherwise conceal. Shock, on the other hand, often operates at the emotional level. Shocking headlines, visuals, or sound bites trigger visceral reactions: anger, disbelief, laughter, or outrage. In an era dominated by algorithms, shock ensures shareability. A controversial clip can be circulated millions of times within hours, extending the reach of the story far beyond its original audience. The very outrage that critics express only adds fuel to its visibility. In this way, shock is not just content, it is currency in the attention economy. The more it provokes, the more it spreads. Yet the use of provocation and shock is a double-edged sword. When used responsibly, it can cut through apathy and inspire meaningful debate. A provocative question might force a politician to reveal their true stance. A shocking report might alert the world to an injustice otherwise ignored. In these moments, the tactics serve the higher purpose of journalism, informing the public and holding power to account. But when provocation becomes an end in itself, detached from substance, it descends into spectacle. It risks turning media into theatre where the loudest, most outrageous voice drowns out the thoughtful one. Audiences, too, play a role in this dynamic. Many claim to dislike sensationalism, yet the metrics tell a different story. Clicks, views, and shares disproportionately reward content that provokes strong emotions. Outrage sells because people cannot resist engaging with what offends or shocks them. This creates a cycle where media outlets are incentivized to push further, to dial up the controversy, to rely on shock as their default weapon. Over time, this can erode trust, as audiences begin to suspect that even serious stories are being packaged for maximum drama rather than maximum truth. In the end, provocation and shock are neither inherently good nor inherently bad, they are tools. What matters is how they are used and to what purpose. When aligned with truth, they can awaken society and demand accountability. When used recklessly, they can distort reality and corrode credibility. The responsibility lies with media professionals to know the difference, and with audiences to demand it. When public debates explode in the media, the implications reach far beyond the stage or the screen. The audience is not just a passive observer, it is the very reason these confrontations matter. Every fiery exchange, every controversial remark, and every sharp retort shapes the way viewers think about truth, accountability, and power. For the public, these moments are not just entertainment, they become reference points informing opinions about society, politics, and culture. The way issues are framed in media often dictates how they are understood at the dinner table, in classrooms, and on social media platforms. One of the most immediate implications for the audience is the way trust is built or eroded. When people see figures in the media being challenged forcefully, it reassures them that no one is above scrutiny. A strong confrontation signals that journalists and commentators are doing their job, holding the powerful to account. On the other hand, if the exchange feels superficial or staged purely for shock value, it deepens the cynicism many already feel about the media. Viewers begin to suspect that what they are witnessing is less about truth and more about ratings, leaving them less inclined to believe future reports, no matter how accurate they may be. Another key impact lies in the amplification of division. Provocative debates often play out in highly polarized environments where audiences already have strong loyalties. When a public figure is humiliated or exposed, supporters of one side cheer while the other side cries foul. This binary reaction reinforces tribal lines, turning debates into battles of identity rather than opportunities for persuasion. For the public, this means that instead of fostering understanding, media clashes often harden existing beliefs, leaving little room for nuance. At the same time, these confrontations can energize civic engagement. A viral moment can spark conversations that might not have happened otherwise. People who rarely pay attention to politics or journalism might suddenly find themselves debating issues of free speech, integrity, or accountability because they were drawn in by the drama. While the spectacle itself may be the hook, the discussion it provokes can encourage broader awareness and participation in public life. The audience is in this way mobilized, sometimes shallowly, sometimes profoundly, by the very debates that critics dismiss as mere theatre. However, the public also bears the risk of manipulation. When media personalities rely too heavily on provocation and performance, the audience can be misled into focusing on personalities rather than principles. Viewers might walk away remembering the insult, the viral clip, or the heated outburst, but not the underlying issue that truly mattered. This creates a distortion where style overshadows substance, and the audience is left entertained but uninformed. Over time, this weakens the capacity of society to engage meaningfully with complex challenges. Ultimately, the audience pays the price or reaps the benefit depending on how these moments are handled. If media figures balance provocation with substance, the public is empowered with sharper tools of understanding. If they choose spectacle over depth, the audience is reduced to consumers of noise rather than participants in democracy. The implications, therefore, are profound. The public's perception of truth, accountability, and integrity in society is constantly being rewritten in these high-profile confrontations. At the end of the day, this isn't just about one person's reputation. It's about what we accept as public discourse. Do we accept ambiguity and deflection when people claim victimhood? Do we forgive flippant remarks, then demand respect when it benefits them? Or do we hold everyone, including the powerful, to the same standards of clarity, consistency, and honesty? Because if words no longer mean what they say, then truth becomes optional, and that's dangerous. If arguments are just theater, then integrity is off stage. So here's what I leave you with: always ask for context, demand accountability, and never let someone use cancellation or misunderstanding as a shield from responsibility. Because when you allow that, you don't protect free speech, you hollow it out. Thank you for staying with me. Stay informed, stay sharp, and never settle for anything less than truth.